Today, I am feeling called to bear my testimony of my journey coming into Christ and some of the things that I was pulled through, and some of the things that I walked through or was guided through, just the journey, the lifetime journey leading up to coming into Christ by the grace of God. So my life started out a little bit rocky compared to what people might call normal standards. I was born addicted to methamphetamine, and rather than letting me become a ward of the state, my grandparents on my biological mother's side took me in. So they ended up actually becoming my mom and my dad, to the best of my knowledge as to how that works. Um, I realized at a very early age that I wasn't growing up in a typical environment. Whenever I would discuss with my peers about their family lives and just things that would come up, I learned very early on that things were different from my life, and I wanted to understand why. I recall being around the age of like 9 or 10, wanting to understand why some people get that everyday cookie cutter lifestyle and other people get those, let's just say, more challenging endeavors. Um, My grandmother got sick when I was very, very young with COPD. And so she was progressively getting more and more sick. And my grandfather, being the great husband that he was with her every step of the way as she was in and out of hospitals. But what that ended up doing was essentially leaving me to my own devices in a lot of regards. It left me in the care of my biological mother more frequently than I would have cared to. So I got a pretty good crash test course of seeing the different types of people in the world, from people who are struggling and suffering through addiction to seeing people in like hospitals, for instance, doctors and nurses, and people who come from more of a higher class society, right? Being able to communicate with all of those different types of individuals, looking back, is actually a gift, in all honesty. But at the time, it seemed as though it was a curse. And so it occurred to me early on, how could a mother not care enough about her own children to the point that she would choose drugs over her kids? Over all 8 of her kids, how could she choose drugs over every single one? How could a parent do that? So I continued to be the why kid, asking why, seeking to understand reality, seeking to understand people, what makes them tick, what really makes the world go round, and on and on. Another thing that I look back on that was really a gift in all of this was I would ask my grandfather for guidance, and I would ask him what he would do if he were me in different circumstances, and he would always tell me the same thing. He would say, "Son, I can't tell you what to do. You have to make your own decisions. It's your life. I can't tell you how to live it." And I'd be like, "Well, what if you were me?" And he's like, "I'm not you. I can't tell you that." And that was so aggravating at the time. But looking back, that was actually a gift because it taught me to critically think. So time goes on, my grandmother continues to get sicker and sicker, in hospitals more and more, and I'm left to my own devices more and more. Inevitably, of course, she ends up passing away. I was about 13 years old whenever that occurred, and I realized that I realize now that with my search for knowledge and my search for understanding, it was attempting to fill that void, because I had turned that lens inward, saying I wasn't good enough. I wasn't worthy of love. I wasn't worthy of love. I wasn't loved by my biological mother because I was unlovable. And so that started a lot of the suicidal ideation. So, following the death of my grandmother, that opened up even a bigger void within my being, of feeling as though like I wasn't good enough. Like even the mom that chose me is gone. Like that's awesome. That's just the way it goes, right? And so, unbeknownst to myself at the time, that void grew bigger with her absence. And of course, my grandfather felt the same because he had diverted so much of his time for so many years taking care of her. And we ended up in a very codependent dynamic, almost as though he was attempting to fill that void by caring for me. And that went back and forth. He also, at the time, dove into the bottle, into his own addictions. Go figure. I guess it runs in the family, huh? But anyways, so time is going on. He's drinking heavier and heavier, progressively more. And I'm continuing to seek external answers to the internal feelings of lack that I was experiencing. Around the same time, I was introduced to White Wicca. And so I started to dabble in the aspects of White Wicca and with Reiki and etc. So I started going on more of a spiritual bend along with the physical bend. So I started seeking the metaphysical as well as the physical answers to everything to be able to understand more what was going on around me. Because if I couldn't control it, the least I could do is understand the why. It's like, okay, A plus B equals C, that makes sense. So that's fine, whatever, I can deal with that. I can understand it, I can deal with it. And at that time, I looked at life as a constant search and acquisition for knowledge. But again, from this lens now, I know that that was just the attempt to fill a void. Time goes on, I'm in high school, and dabbling with marijuana and with cigarettes, substances. I end up in the opioid trap. Once I ended up on the opioids, it altered me immensely. And I was just trying to numb the pain looking back, but ultimately it was just a bandage, as those things are. And I began stealing from my dad quite a bit. Probably somewhere around the numbers of $20,000 to $30,000 throughout the course of it all. Just in the way that I would lie and manipulate and just do all the things to be able to continue to feed my addiction and keep it hidden, of course. And him not wanting to think the worst because of his daughter and the other family members who would fall into the trap of addiction. He didn't want to believe that. He probably knew on some level, but he didn't want to believe it. So I continued to hurt the people that were closest to me as I got deeper into my addiction, just trying to fill the void, just trying to feel okay, just trying to navigate this sometimes very chaotic, crazy world that we live in. And I graduate high school, and I fall into the same exact trap that my mother had. And it's interesting because I had judged her so hard, so much. I did not understand, and I judged the absolute hell out of her for choosing drugs over all of her children. Until I stepped into it. And then I saw it is a black hole. All addiction is truly, it's a black hole and it's a trap. And people step into those addictions and it just starts to spiral them and spiral them and spiral them and just try and consume them, right? Millions of people have fallen into that trap throughout time, and millions of people, unfortunately, will probably continue to. Very few ever actually make it out. So, going through the timeline, I, at this point, was in a meth addiction, continuing to steal, to lie, and to be shown exactly what it was that I had been judging so I could learn. And that's another beautiful gift that I see as I look back on my life, is all the things that I judged with any level of real depth that I truly judged. I ended up being shown further down the road exactly what it was. So I learned firsthand exactly how easy it is to fall into the trap of addiction. I don't agree with it, but I see. And time goes on. My dad ends up passing away. My grandfather ends up passing away as well. And it was at that time I felt the massive chasm. Like I truly started to realize how big of a hole I had been experiencing and how I had been trying to fill that with all these different things. And I became aware of all the wrong and all the pain and all the suffering that I had been causing him and people around me. How absolutely narcissistically selfish I had been, just in the attempt of wanting to be okay. Because I didn't love myself. I didn't feel as though I was worthy of love. So anyone that tried to love me, I just hurt. I lied to, I hurt them. Because I was hurting. Because hurt people hurt people. So he passes, and I start truly facing reality. And that was a big one. There was a time whenever I couldn't do it anymore. And I begged and I pleaded because I felt so alone, so lost in the dark, so unloved and unlovable and just so worthless that I begged for God, the devil, anybody, just send me somebody that could put up with my shit for long enough for me to be able to deal with it, just to be there. Around that same time, I actually since I had a hard time with the word faith, just side note, my biological mother's name is Faith, right? So that word just kind of had a weird connotation in my head. It's like, fuck no, I don't want to have faith. Why would you tell me to do such a thing? That's a horrible thing to tell a person. Who would do that to somebody? Who would tell a person to have faith? Little did I know. But, yeah, so I start dabbling down the Luciferic path, and the whole concept and premise of what that promises as you're going through those processes is to separate from the tree of life and become like God. Which, from my perspective now, I know that that is something that we were created in the likeness and image of. We were already like God. So to become like God, that's a lie. That's taking a bite of a lie. But I took a bite, and I took a bite, and I took a bite, and it definitely showed me a lot. It showed me everything. It showed me everything and anything that I set my perspective and set my gaze on. Anything I wanted to know, it showed me. It showed me all the fabrics of reality. It showed me all the interconnectedness of all the things. It showed me all of it. It didn't allow me to experience it. Because God is love. Love is life. So to separate, to perceive your separation away from God, to become like God, and God is love, it was even more of that void just trying to be filled. And only this time I was consuming knowledge and substance and more substance. And it was just heinous, to put it simply. But my prayer is answered, and there was a woman sent to me who we ended up together for a little while. And that relationship definitely brought out the worst in probably both of us, but me especially. It brought out the absolute worst in me. This whole process brought out the worst in me. It really started to give me an idea, looking back. The clarity, the hindsight is a beautiful thing, but it started to give me the clarity how what it is that you are embodying on the inside ends up projected into a reflection on the outside. So you start projecting all of these things that you're running from, all of these things that you're hiding from yourself, all of these things that are just, no, that could never be me. There's no way that can't be me. So you start projecting it onto the people closest to you. And so that went on for about 3 years in a very toxic relationship, very toxic codependent dynamic. Until I was so tired and so worn out and so disintegrated and split into all of these crazy realms of consciousness and viewpoints and the New Age spirituality and all of these different things that I broke again. And this time I begged for God to step in because I couldn't do it anymore. If I had went on, I probably would have just killed myself many times, but this is the time whenever it was just like, okay, I thought all those other times I was done, but it's crazy how whenever you truly think you're done and then you go forward a little bit more and there's another bar and it's like, oh, you're done. Yeah, well, nonetheless, you're not done until you're done. You're not allowed out until you're allowed out. And that became very apparent to me. Like, you could try it, but ultimately it's not going to do anything for you, in my experience. So I begged for God to step in, to intervene, because I had no idea how to get out of it. I had dug myself into such a hole of addiction. I was in a relationship that was just draining my being, just hurting both of us, and just causing more pain than it was causing anything else. It was just creating more pain. I learned a lot about myself in the process, but it was just creating more pain, more traumas for both of us. Mentally, physically, emotionally. It was all of it. Yeah, so fast forward, and in my studies, I'm researching into the spiritual aspects of ham radios, as I had inherited a bunch of ham radio equipment from my grandfather when he passed. And in the process of my spiritual research and studies and the mystical knowledge and all of that type of stuff, I came across the concept of pyramid power. And I realized that the towers that he had erected on the house that I had inherited were basically just metal pyramids. They were set up with the lines, and they were set up to the north, the east, the south, the west. Excuse me. And I came across a woman named Zenka with an organization called LightNet who was doing ham radio contact with extraterrestrials. And it woke something up inside of me. It brought me out of that haze that I'd been existing in, and something told me deep within that I needed to go and write an email to her, figure out how to contact her and get an email out to her and just spew my guts. All the spiritual principles, all the spiritual knowledge, all this stuff that I had been learning and researching and studying as I was falling down that rabbit hole and spiraling in that void. And I sent the email out, and I forgot all about it until about a month later I received an email back from her. And it turns out she lived in the same state that I do. And she wants to set up a video conference, a video chat. We do. And we end up speaking for about 4 hours about all of these different spiritual principles and understandings and just all of these far out concepts and ideas. And she's like, no, I need to meet you. So she drives 2 hours to my house where I was living at the time with my partner at the time, and ends up actually staying the night there while we communicate further. Come the end of it, she asks me outright, she's like, are you using? And I told her the truth. I said, yes. I don't want to be. I never wanted to fall into this trap to begin with. I always swore that I wouldn't, but yes. Yeah, I was. I hadn't been that day, but I was. Ultimately, yes. I was in active addiction. And she said, do you truly want out? And of course, I said yes. I definitely wanted out. And she said, okay, well, if you figure out something to do with that big, beautiful brain of yours, we will give you a grant through the Dream Machine Project, and we will fund you. And we will bring you out to Sedona, and we will allow you to perform these experiments and maybe give you a chance at a better life. And as soon as she was gone, pretty much that very same day, it started formulating. God started showing me some of the components to bring together to be able to perform an experiment, to study some of the concepts that I had been researching and diving into, and some of the concepts that started to seam together and weave together in a very beautiful way by the grace of God were the concepts of a rodent coil and the way in which they can amplify electricity through copper wiring, depending on the way in which they wind a coil, along with the power of prayer and the power of group intentions and the power of 8, as well as the sacred geometrical windings of a 9-pointed star. So what it ended up being coined at the time is the Love Manifestation Amplification Experiment. And essentially, I presented this to Zenka, and time goes forward, end up getting the grant, end up getting brought out to Sedona, and I'm working on the sobriety aspect by the grace of God. Again, I'm so grateful for God and for sending an angel in the form of Zenka at that time, working through her in such a beautiful way to pull not only myself out of the addiction, but my partner at the time as well, for essentially for saving us. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. I really don't. But anyways, we end up in Sedona, perform the experiment, and I meet a bunch of beautiful people in the community here. A gentleman by the name of Mark, who is the founder of Sedona Quantum Consciousness. If you ever find yourself in the area, you should come check it out. It's definitely a very beautiful mission. But he allowed me to begin to live at a space that was being converted into a retreat center. And he allowed me to start working for him and being able to not only separate from the environment that I was living in, not being around the same people, being in a new environment, being around people who were doing healthy things, who were being of service to humanity, who were being everything that I had known deep down inside, but I just never knew how to accomplish it. I've always known that I wasn't here for myself, and that I always knew that there was so much pain going on in the world, and it was in my being that I wanted to help fix it, but I didn't know how. And so that feeling of stuckness, that feeling of pain, that added to the whole aspect of how I ended up in addiction anyways. But all of that is perfect. I am so grateful, and I love every bit of everything that I've went through that has led me up to there. Nonetheless, there's still that undeniable wall around my heart and that undeniable void that I was wanting to fill with all of these different New Age concepts and all of these different New Age principles. And they did good for a bit. It was bandages, right? It's like, okay, well, if you meditate twice a day, X amount of time, you can really calm your nervous system. You can really start to tune into that inner realm and quiet the voices that like to bounce around in here and try and cause anxiety or depression or anger. If you go and you take a run and you do all these things to be able to fill your time, rather than going and diving into an addiction and going and doing something unproductive, you could do something productive. You can lay some flooring here and get paid for it and have a place to live for it. That's beautiful. That's awesome. Go and exercise. Go and do all these things. And I started being shown different ways of living and different ways of being that I had never been exposed to before. And that was another beautiful component to all of it. But again, that pain that was around the heart and that feeling of not being enough, like at the center, at the core, I didn't feel worthy of all of the love that I was experiencing through all of the people that were around me, all of the beautiful tribe in which I have made in this area, in which we have all come together in community. I wasn't truly experiencing it. I was feeling as though I had to, on an unconscious level, this wasn't a conscious thing, but on an unconscious level, I was feeling as though I wasn't worth it. Like I wasn't good enough for it. I didn't deserve it. And so it got me into that whole people pleasing trap of like, okay, well, if I do this for you, maybe that makes me good enough for the love that I'm experiencing. If I do this, maybe that makes me good enough. Maybe that makes me worthy. If I do all this stuff for everybody, that makes me worthy. Now I'm lovable. Okay. Doing all the right things for all the wrong reasons. But again, that served a beautiful purpose. Because what that ended up being was an opportunity. Helping a friend sell a van. A friend by the name of Bradley. Prosperous Legacy Advisors with Earthwaking Village. And I helped him sell a van, and rather than making a % commission, there was something inside of me that told me, because he had been talking about this thing called the Remember Experience, and he'd been hyping it up, and it sounded beautiful, and Costa Rica sounds beautiful at the time, from where I was at that time. And Costa Rica sounded beautiful. And so there was that part of me that said, don't take payment. Don't take payment. Ask him to go to the Remember Experience. Ask to be brought up to Costa Rica. Ask to go and experience that. And again, it was that inner voice, that small voice within, that internal, my soul, I guess you could say. It was my soul talking to me directly. It was God talking to me directly. I don't know. But something said to ask for that as an exchange. So time goes forward, and ironically, this is all occurring the same week as my birthday, my 27th birthday. Another funny little tidbit there. So I dive into the Remember Experience unaware of what all that would entail. And the container that was held there, and the way in which the facilitators, Jonathan England, and just everybody there at Earthwaking Village, the way they're able to just get out of the way and let God flow through them and just let everything unfold according to God's plan, the way that they get out of the way and just allow that to work. When they say that in the descriptor of the Remember Experience, to remember your true identity, they're not kidding. But that process, to be able to remember who I am and whose I am, I had to swim through all of it. All the pain that I had been in, all the pain that I had been avoiding, all the pain that I had caused other people, all the pain that I had created in the world by allowing those false perspectives, those lies to get inside of my eyes. All that pain, I had to feel it. I had to face the facts of who I had been, who I had appeared to be, and who I was pretending to be. And essentially what that boiled out to, and I'm just going to own it, it was a narcissistic woman abuser. It was. That's the part that I had played. That's summed it all up. The lying, the manipulating, the stealing from the people that loved me the most. And the way that reflected back to me into my environment and my partners. And so that's what I was seeing on them, and I was projecting that outwardly. And so it was just two narcissistic individuals and that magnetization being reflected back, or maybe it was just my projections. I don't know. But I owned it. I owned it all, and I swam through it, and I was actually able to open up and release all by the grace of God, I was able to open up and release all that shit that was blocking me from being able to truly be in my heart, being able to truly feel the connection to the world around me, to the beautiful souls, to God. I finally was able to release that into a safe container. I was finally able to feel that fully in an environment where I was not judged. And after I got done screaming and crying and breaking and swimming through all of that pain and all of that shit that I had caused, I look up and I look at all the people around me, all of those beautiful souls around me, and I see nothing but love coming through them. And I feel nothing but love flowing through them. And it finally sank. It finally hit me. I finally remembered I am a child of God. Everything else is just bullshit. But at the core, I am a child of God. And God loves me. And it was at that point that I accepted Jesus Christ as my own Lord, personal Lord and Savior. And I accepted him as the King of my heart. And just like that, all of that eternal disintegration that I'd been experiencing, all of that void that I'd been trying to fill from consuming all the things, the ultimate pain and everything of not enoughness, it just snapped. And I remembered. By the grace of God, I remembered. That I was brought unto salvation. Even after all that I did, all the kicking, all the screaming, even at the times of just literally cussing out God, begging him to kill me, telling him he was a piece of shit. Projecting it, trying to project it even onto God. But I was the piece of shit. Everything that I was hating in the outside world, everything that I saw that was broken or sick in the outside world, just like that, in that one moment, just disappeared. And I realized it was all perfect. It was all love. It was all according to plan. Even I. And so that adds no. And so with all that being said, I know, in my own experience, from my own testimonial story, from all of it, I know that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the light. I know that all good comes from God. And I know that everything that led me up until this point, everything that occurred, everything that God allowed, everything that I was born into, all of these things that I thought I had been, everything that I thought was broken or that was wrong was exactly what it was supposed to happen. Every bit of that mess was exactly the way it was supposed to be. It's all perfect. And I have the deepest level of gratitude in my heart for every soul that played a part, for every soul that God used to be able to bring me to where I'm at today, to bring me unto Christ. All of the souls here in Sedona, all of the souls in Costa Rica at Earthwaking Village, all of the souls in my hometown in which I grew up. My mother, my grandfather, my grandmother, all of it. Everyone that God used to play a part in my life. All for this moment now, because I know that I didn't do a single bit of this on my own. It was all for God's glory. I am nothing without God. Thank you. Thank you all. I love you. God bless.